232 trucks, engines dead, goods decaying, families waiting with empty hands and weary eyes. My brothers, my sisters, this is not a story from a faraway land, nor is it the scene of a film. This is Paga. This is Dakola. This is the border where Ghana and Burkina Faso meet. In the month of September, in the year 2025, one decree changed everything. A lifeline of trade and hope was turned into a graveyard of silence. But listen carefully, beloved community. This is bigger than trucks, bigger than customs rules, bigger than the dust of Paga or the heat of Ouagadougou. This is about the dignity of nations. This is about the fragile promise of West African unity. This is about whether our children will inherit bridges of cooperation or walls of suspicion. And so I invite you, with a voice both humble and bold, subscribe now and let us walk this road together. Let us lift up Africa's story in Africa's own voice. Because the tale of the Ghana-Burkina border crisis is not only their story, it is ours. It is history being written before our eyes. Picture this scene in your heart. The sun burns hot above the northern plains. The road to Paga stretches dusty and long, a familiar artery of life between Ghana and Burkina Faso. For many years, this road carried hope. Tomatoes from Bolgatanga, fish from Tema, fabrics from Accra, and building materials bound for Ouagadougou. Drivers knew the route, merchants trusted the trade, and families depended on the steady flow. Then came September of the year 2025. With a single decision, the government of Burkina Faso declared that no truck longer than 54 feet would be allowed to cross its border. At first it sounded technical, even harmless, like a matter of simple regulation. Yet what followed was devastating. 232 trucks rolled up to the crossing at Paga and Dakola, only to be told they could go no further. Engines fell silent. Cargo remained locked in limbo. The lifeline of commerce was suddenly cut. At the beginning, many thought it might be temporary, perhaps a misunderstanding that would soon be corrected. Yet the hours became days, and the days turned into weeks. Fish began to rot under the relentless sun. Tomatoes shriveled into waste. Onions decayed in their sacks. Manufactured goods destined for Ouagadougou gathered dust at the roadside. The drivers, men whose very livelihood depends on the road, men who carry their children's school fees and their families' daily bread in the cargo behind them, were trapped in despair. One weary driver gave words to the silent suffering when he said, "We have been here for more than a week. My family depends on this cargo. If I lose it, my children will go hungry." His testimony was not only his own story, it was the cry of hundreds, the echo of thousands across the land. The government of Burkina Faso defended its decision. Officials spoke of security and sovereignty. They pointed to the fragile Sahel, where armed groups move across borders with ease, carrying weapons and sowing fear. They said the measure was meant to protect the nation, to guard its roads, to prove that Burkina Faso would not be passive in the face of danger. Sovereignty became their shield, yet sovereignty for one side became starvation for the other. In Accra, unease spread swiftly. Traders saw their investments wither before their eyes. Transport companies reported losses of thousands of cedis for every truck stranded. In the markets of northern Ghana, shortages grew sharper each day. A bag of onions that had cost a small amount only a week earlier suddenly doubled in price. Fish, once plentiful in the stalls, became scarce. For families already battling inflation, this crisis turned daily survival into a heavier burden. Older generations watched with heavy hearts. They remembered the days when colonial borders cut across families, tribes, and communities without regard for the people. They had placed their hope in ECOWAS, believing its promise of free movement and shared prosperity would heal those wounds. Instead, they saw history repeat itself, as lines on a map once again hardened into barriers of suspicion and distrust. This, beloved community, was only the beginning. The standoff at Paga had lit a fire that would not remain confined to policy papers or quiet conversations. The question that loomed was simple, yet dangerous. Would this remain an inconvenience of regulation, or would it ignite into open confrontation between nations and their people? The answer would not wait long, for soon the voices of the drivers would rise from the roadside, turning silence into protest and protest into a storm. The silence at Paga could not last forever. As the days stretched on, exhaustion turned into anger, and anger turned into action. The drivers, weary from waiting, gathered their strength and made their stand. They blocked the lanes with their parked trucks. They raised placards, written with trembling hands, yet firm resolve. They lifted their voices above the dust and the noise, declaring that enough was enough. Their protest was simple in its message, but powerful in its force. The governments must intervene, and they must do so now. This was no longer a quiet inconvenience. It was a cry for dignity. For the drivers, the cargo was not just business, it was survival. Each spoiled tomato was a debt unpaid. Each rotting fish was a child's school fee lost. Each day of waiting was a day of despair for families back home. News of the protest spread quickly across Ghana. Radio stations broadcast live reports from the border. Newspapers carried front-page stories with photographs of endless lines of stranded trucks. Television screens showed drivers chanting in the scorching sun. Social media amplified their voices, and before long, the whole nation was watching. In Accra, opposition politicians seized the moment. They accused the government of weakness, of failing to defend the interests of Ghanaian citizens. They asked, if Ghana could not guarantee safe passage for its own traders, what did that say about the nation's sovereignty? Public opinion hardened. The government could not remain silent any longer. It was at this moment that Donatus Akamugri Atanga, the Upper East regional minister, took a step that would prove both symbolic and necessary. He traveled north to Paga. He walked among the drivers, not as a distant official, but as a man willing to look into their weary eyes. He listened to their grievances. He assured them that their voices were heard, that their suffering was seen. His presence was meant to calm the storm, but it was also a political act, a signal that the government would not ignore its citizen. Yet Atanga's mission did not end there. He crossed into Dakola, stepping onto Burkina Faso's soil to meet with border officials face to face. The discussions were described as candid and tense. The Burkinabe authorities stood firm, repeating that the directive was essential for national security and road safety. At the same time, they admitted that the situation was causing hardship and promised to relay Ghana's concerns to Ouagadougou. These talks revealed the delicate balance of the moment. Burkina Faso could not afford to appear weak, for its government was under pressure to show control in the face of insecurity. Yet it also could not afford to sever ties with Ghana, a neighbor whose markets and supply chains are vital to its economy. On the other side, Ghana faced its own dilemma. The government needed to defend fairness and protect its people, yet it could not risk provoking a deeper rupture with a strategic partner. Meanwhile, the protests at Paga grew louder. Drivers warned that they could not wait indefinitely. Some threatened to escalate their demonstrations, to block even perishable shipments in order to increase pressure on the authorities. The tactic was dangerous, for it placed lives and livelihoods on the line. Observers cautioned that such unrest, if left unresolved, could spread beyond the border and ignite wider instability in the communities that depended on trade. The atmosphere grew heavy with uncertainty. Each passing hour carried the weight of both economic loss and political risk. In Ghana, ministers tried to assure the public that negotiations were ongoing. In Burkina Faso, officials insisted that sovereignty must come first. Between these two positions lay a fragile space, a tightrope stretched over the chasm of mistrust. And so the crisis reached its peak. From a single directive in Ouagadougou had grown a confrontation that now involved drivers, politicians, diplomats, and entire nations. The road at Paga had become more than a passageway of goods. It had become a battlefield of narratives: security versus survival, sovereignty versus solidarity, suspicion versus trust. The question that hung in the air was stark. Would reason prevail through dialogue, or would the anger of the people erupt beyond control? The next move would shape not only Ghana and Burkina Faso, but the fragile fabric of West Africa itself. The protests at Paga were not only a clash at a checkpoint, they were a mirror reflecting the hidden costs of political decisions. While governments debated policies and sovereignty, ordinary people bore the heaviest burdens. For the drivers, the roadside became both home and prison. Many slept in their trucks for days without proper shelter. Some sold personal belongings to buy water. Others relied on small gifts of food from nearby villagers who themselves had little to spare. The smell of rotting fish and vegetables hung in the air, a constant reminder that every wasted hour translated into deeper poverty. Women who traded in vegetables and fruit saw their livelihoods collapse. Tomatoes that should have filled market stalls with color and abundance instead turned into foul waste. Young men who worked as loaders and assistants found themselves jobless, wandering the dusty roadside in search of a day's pay that never came. What seemed to be a technical directive in Ouagadougou had now robbed entire communities of income and dignity. The economic losses were staggering. Transport unions estimated collective damages in the millions of cedis. Each stranded truck carried debts, contracts, and promises that could no longer be fulfilled. Small businesses in Ghana faced collapse as goods failed to reach their customers. Wholesalers in Ouagadougou complained that Ghanaian products had disappeared from their shelves. Even Ghanaian importers of Burkinabe goods felt the shock, proving that both sides of the border were victims of the deadlock. Markets across northern Ghana bore witness to this pain. Prices of fresh produce climbed rapidly. A bag of onions that had cost one price only a week earlier suddenly demanded double. Fish, once abundant, became scarce, forcing families to change their diets or go without. For households already weakened by inflation, this was not just an inconvenience, it was survival under siege. In Accra, the crisis entered the heart of politics. Opposition voices grew louder, accusing the government of weakness, claiming it had failed to defend its people. Some members of parliament demanded reciprocal measures, urging Ghana to impose its own restrictions until Burkina Faso relented. Others called for restraint, warning that retaliation would only deepen the wound. Parliamentary debates grew heated, each day of deadlock eroding public confidence further. Analysts warned that if the crisis was not resolved quickly, the government's credibility could suffer lasting harm. In Ouagadougou, the picture was no less complicated. Officials faced criticism from traders and business groups who argued that the directive harmed the economy more than it protected security. Yet others praised the government for standing firm, for defending sovereignty at all costs. For the leadership, appearing decisive mattered as much as the actual policy. To bend under pressure, even for the sake of trade, risked being seen as weak in a time when the state's control was already questioned. Beyond national politics lay an even larger wound. The crisis eroded trust in ECOWAS itself. Citizens who once believed in regional integration now asked bitterly, "What good is a union that cannot keep borders open?" For decades, leaders had promised free movement of people and goods. Yet here, before their eyes, a single directive had silenced those promises in a matter of days. Older generations who remembered the scars of colonial boundaries felt this betrayal most keenly. They had hoped ECOWAS would heal the divisions carved by history, that it would transform artificial lines into bridges of solidarity. Instead, they saw suspicion and mistrust return, threatening to undo decades of progress. This was the hidden danger. Crises like this did not only rot food or stall trucks, they rotted trust. And when trust collapses, treaties lose their power and communities lose their faith in leaders. The question whispered in markets and echoed in homes was painful. If a single border could be closed so easily, what hope was there for true regional unity? The anger of the drivers had already shaken two nations. The disappointment of the people now threatened to shake an entire region. Would this remain only a border standoff, or would it grow into a symbol of the slow unraveling of West African unity itself? And I ask you, the listener, what do you see in this crisis? A temporary disruption or the warning of a deeper fracture? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The standoff at Paga was not contained within the borders of Ghana and Burkina Faso. Far beyond the dusty frontier, eyes were watching, calculations were being made, and meanings were being drawn. What seemed to be a quarrel over trucks and road safety quickly became a symbol of something larger: the struggle for influence, dignity, and direction in West Africa. In Washington, policymakers followed closely. Ghana has long been celebrated as a reliable partner, a beacon of democratic stability, a nation that cooperates in matters of security and economic reform. Burkina Faso, by contrast, has shifted course in recent years. Its leadership, under immense pressure at home, turned away from traditional Western partners and leaned instead toward alternative alliances. For observers in the United States, the message of the border crisis was not just logistical, it was political. A decree at Dakola could be read as a quiet signal of distrust toward Accra's closeness with the West. Across the Atlantic, officials in Brussels voiced concern. The European Union has long promoted regional integration as a foundation for prosperity and peace. Yet their words were cautious, for their influence in the Sahel has waned. They could offer statements, but they could not move the trucks. In Moscow and Beijing, the crisis was viewed through a different lens. For both Russia and China, West Africa represents opportunity. Instability weakens Western footholds, while frustration with ECOWAS and traditional partners opens doors for new relationships. To them, every disruption in trade, every quarrel between neighbors, is both a challenge and an opening. And what of ECOWAS itself, the very body created to guarantee free movement of goods and people? Already weakened by recent military takeovers in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, the Union now found its authority openly questioned at Paga. Citizens looked at the stranded trucks and asked, "If ECOWAS cannot prevent this, then what is the promise of membership worth?" The credibility of the institution wavered under the harsh sun, as its declarations sounded increasingly like empty echoes. The media across the world took notice. Commentators warned that if a single directive in Ouagadougou could immobilize 232 trucks, what would happen if other states followed suit? Could the entire regional economy be held hostage to unilateral decisions? Could the dream of continental free trade unravel one border at a time? The world saw more than spoiled goods. It saw a test of Africa's direction. Would West Africa remain vulnerable to outside forces, defined by division and mistrust? Or would it seize this moment to forge a unity that could not be dictated from abroad? The answer could not be written in Washington, Brussels, Moscow, or Beijing. It had to be written in Accra and Ouagadougou, in the voices of drivers and traders, in the choices of leaders and citizens. The question that remained was clear. Would West Africa stand divided, or would it stand together? The crisis at Paga was not merely about trucks, nor even about two nations. It was a crossroad, a signpost pointing to two very different futures for West Africa. The first path is the path of fragmentation. Along this road, each nation acts alone, defending its borders without regard for neighbors. Sovereignty becomes a fortress, and every state chooses suspicion over solidarity. If this path is taken, integration will crumble. Borders will harden, trade will slow, and the fragile dream of a shared destiny will wither. Citizens will pay the price through higher costs, lost opportunities, and deeper instability. The Paga standoff has already shown how quickly trust can unravel. If repeated elsewhere, it could dismantle the fragile fabric that binds the region together. But there is another path. The second road leads to renewed unity. Along this way, leaders face the pain of the crisis, yet choose to transform it into strength. Dialogue becomes more than words. It becomes action. Border management is reformed with fairness and cooperation. Mechanisms of ECOWAS are rebuilt, not as hollow promises, but as living systems that protect traders and citizens alike. In this vision, the suffering at Paga becomes not the end of hope, but the foundation of a stronger tomorrow. The role of the people is critical in shaping which path is chosen. The drivers, the market women, the small traders, the elders who carry memories of division. Their voices cannot be ignored. They remind the continent that sovereignty must not come at the cost of solidarity. They carry the moral authority that political leaders often lack. For the older generation, this is not theory. They remember when colonial lines separated brother from brother, sister from sister, community from community. They know that when borders harden, families suffer. They also know that unity is not a luxury, it is a necessity. Their testimony is a warning and a guide. Global powers will continue to watch and to intervene. Yet the strength of Africa lies not in the choices of outsiders, but in the choices of Africans themselves. If West African nations stand together, they can negotiate with dignity. If they remain divided, they will be shaped by forces beyond their control. The road ahead is narrow and uncertain, yet it remains open. Paga has revealed the dangers, but it has also revealed the possibilities. The question that remains is this: will the nations of West Africa choose division, or will they choose unity? The answer is not yet written. It lies in the decisions of today, decisions that will echo for generations. Which path will be taken? That, beloved friends, is the choice that now stands before us all. The story of Paga and Dakola is more than a chapter of trade gone wrong. It is a living parable of our time. The Ghana-Burkina border crisis has shown us how fragile progress can be when trust is broken. It has shown us that a single decision can ripple outward, from stranded trucks to empty markets, from weary drivers to anxious families, from local hardship to regional fracture. Yet it has also reminded us of something deeper. Borders are not just lines on a map. They are tests of our will to live together. Every checkpoint can be either a wall of suspicion or a bridge of cooperation. The choice belongs not to outsiders, but to us, to our leaders, to our communities, and to our children. The elders among us know this truth well. They carry the memory of colonial divisions, when Africa's unity was torn apart by rulers who did not know our languages or respect our bonds. They remind us that history does not repeat itself unless we let it. They call us to choose a better way, a way of solidarity. For ECOWAS, the challenge is urgent. Integration cannot survive on speeches alone. It must be defended, renewed, and made real in the daily lives of people. If the Union cannot guarantee open borders, its credibility will fade. But if it learns from this crisis, if it reforms its mechanisms and proves itself a guardian of cooperation, then hope can live again. And for Africa as a whole, the choice is stark. We can remain a continent defined by division, or we can become a continent defined by unity. The West African unity we long for will not be handed down from Washington, Brussels, Moscow, or Beijing. It must be forged in Accra and Ouagadougou, in Lagos and Bamako, in the voices of traders and teachers, farmers and drivers, elders and youth. So I ask you, what lesson do you see in this crisis? Do you see only despair, or do you see an opportunity to build something stronger? Share your thoughts in the comments, for your voice matters. And before you go, hear this call. If you believe that the future of Africa must be written by Africans, if you believe that the pain of the Ghana-Burkina border crisis can give birth to a new dawn, then like, share, and subscribe. Let us speak with one voice. Let us carry the hope of our ancestors forward, and let us choose the path of dignity, courage, and unity.